Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Connections. So I'm just going to stop wait. Carol, I'm hearing you on the English channel. I'm just wondering. Wait, I'm just going to stop just for the translations. So for the translation, so the line for the French from the Oui, c'est la ligne anglaise que tu entends. Yes. C'est beau. Okay. Merci, ça va. All right, so a little bit of a glitch there. I apologize. So start back in English and start over. Just press a reset. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Connections, Coaches and Athletes. We will be starting in a few minutes. I just want to review a few housekeeping items before we begin the presentation. Please note the session is being recorded, so I ask that that you respect others around through visual and verbal feedback. And it will also be posted on our website for those that have missed this session. We're using Microsoft Teams, as you know, so if you're not familiar, it does offer you a closed captioning function. If you'd like to enable your closed captioning, simply click the ellipses and the three dots at the bottom of the menu of the screen, the drop-down menu, and select Turn on Live Captioning. If you prefer to listen to the session in French, which we were just hearing earlier, you can join the French audio stream by dialing the corresponding number in the invitation. I will be posting in the chat once I'm done this message. The phone line is for audio only for the English side, and same thing with the French side. If you experience any difficulties, you can always message me. So in the chat box at the top menu of your screen, you'll see that nice bubble. Just say @Francis, and I will be able to help you out. I also would like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered here today. Today I am here on the outskirts of the Ottawa, on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. The land that surrounds us is part of who we are. It reflects our histories, and I welcome you from across our vast countries. Salut, bonjour à tous. Bienvenue à Connexion Saine, entraîneurs et athlètes pour la session d'aujourd'hui. Nous commencerons dans quelques minutes. Je veux passer en revue quelques éléments d'ordre administratif avant la présentation. Veuillez noter que la session en cours est enregistrée. Alors, on va l'afficher sur notre site web. Alors, d'être connaissant de vos propos qui sont dits et qu'est-ce qu'on voit ici. Comme vous voyez, on est sur une plateforme Teams, Microsoft Teams. Elle offre une fonction de sous-titrage en anglais seulement, malheureusement. Si vous souhaitez l'activer pour la présentation, regardez les trois petits points en suspension au bas de votre menu et le menu déroulant, faites activer le sous-titre. C'est quelque chose que vous pouvez ajouter. Si vous préférez la session en français, je vais mettre le lien dans la boîte de chat. Comme ça, vous pouvez cliquer puis connecter. Puis Carole, notre interprète, est là pour nous aider là, à transmettre la session en français pour vous. Si vous avez besoin d'aide dans le menu chat, faites le à commercial Francis, puis je vais être là pour vous aider. Alors, je finis en soulignant les terres sur lesquelles on se rassemble aujourd'hui. Moi, je suis ici à l'extérieur de la ville d'Ottawa, sur le territoire non soumis du peuple algonquin. Alors, la terre qui nous entoure fait partie de ce que nous sommes et il reflète notre histoire. Je souhaite la bienvenue à partout du vaste pays. Merci.
All right. Hi, everyone, and happy Earth Day. My name is Andrea Johnson. I'm the Project Coordinator, Diversity and Inclusion at the CAC, and I'm excited to be introducing our webinar today on Healthy Connections, Coaches and Athletes, delivered by Kids Help Phone. We heard from coaches that they want additional resources on how they can support athletes to the best of their abilities without causing harm. Our partner, Kids Help Phone, collected data identifying that over 40% of calls and texts are about relationships. Young people up to 29 years old reach out to Kids Help Phone for support across Canada at a rate of over 1,300 calls and texts every single day. Kids Help Phone is doing amazing work to ensure that young people all over Canada don't feel alone. Through this webinar, we hope you get insight on how to continue to build healthy relationships with your sport participants. And now to introduce our speaker for the session today, Gayle Browne is the Clinical Director of Kids Help Phone. In her current role, Gayle oversees all of the training, education, and evaluation of the professional counselors at Kids Help Phone. She was also a counselor herself for 15 years and comes from a background in social work and psychology. Gayle, the virtual stage is yours.
Why, thank you. Very exciting. I think what always stands out to me when I hear someone introduce me like that is the 20 years that I've now been in this field.
Hi, Gayle, can I stop you here? Sorry.
Yeah.
Carol, we can still hear you on the English channel. I'm sorry,
sure.
it's distracting because we can hear both at the same time. So
Sure,
So Carol, I'm going to connect you offline. So I'm just going to let Gayle continue, and then I'll come with you offline. Okay? Merci. Thanks. Sorry about that, Carol. Bye-bye.
I feel like there's always new and ingenious ways of playing with technology that always interrupts us when we start these kinds of things now. So that's always just part of the deal. So 20 years in this field now, which to me sounds staggering. And it's very exciting for me to be with this particular group because I spend most of my time with either young people, counselors, or often parents. So that's sort of like where our relationship building information and expertise is. So it was really an interesting thing for me to be able to look at those skills and those ways of building that relationship from like a coaching perspective, a coaching and athlete perspective. That was really very cool for me. So one of the things I think that stood out first was that it's a unique relationship. There's many similarities. I mean, I think building relationships as human beings, there's lots of similarities in how we do that across all kinds of relationships, but there's definitely some unique things, particularly in a coaching relationship that are really interesting for me to think about. So what I'll probably do is go through my presentation. I have a tendency to go off track sometimes, so I'm going to keep my notes here and try to keep myself focused a little bit, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. I think if there are questions that you definitely want to have answered, you can feel free to pop them in the chat. But I can't see the chat, so I won't be answering them right in the session. But hopefully we can get to the ones that we can get to all of them afterward, or some of them afterward at the end. So we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So we're going to look at how coaches can build healthy relationships. So I think the first thing that I always like to do when I'm thinking about working with anybody is to think about, especially with our young people, and really that is pretty much up to age 29 psychologically now. Really, our brain is still in development until we're 29. So whenever we're working with young people, I like to think about first, like where developmentally they're at, right? So just from a brain perspective, what their capacity is and what developmental tasks they're taking on. Because I think we have to start there and really, look at it from sort of an understanding of what's capable within this relationship and what's this young person capable of. And so I always like to think and look at something like, when we have toddlers, like when you think of a toddler, you expect certain kinds of behaviors, right? And I think as adults, we have all kinds of patience with toddlers and we support them. We give them all kinds of leeway with those behaviors because they're learning and because they're toddlers and they don't necessarily know any better. Well, I mean, I think I would argue that there's actually between teenagers and toddlers like some similarities, and one of the ways that they're similar is that they're taking on new things, right? So learning new things and becoming curious about the world, and in a way that's brand new to them, where they have a little bit of power that they want to start to assert. So young people are learning about the world, they're pushing boundaries, and of course they're also sometimes throwing what we call tantrums in toddlers. So sometimes they're also having really difficult times with those emotions as well. So I always like to start with that developmental view on young people. So I would say to consider for sure that really the major developmental task, I would say, as we grow and get up to around like being in your 20s, is really becoming independent, right? It's pushing away from authority and from parents and from people who have authority in their lives, and really trying to assert some independence. So just to keep that in the back of your mind, because that's really challenging, I think, to work with people when they're in that phase in their life, because it's a balance always of like our needs and their needs, right? So I think that's something just to keep in mind as we go through this. So when you're, sorry, I'm just going to keep, I'm flipping my notes because I don't have my presenter screen. So please forgive me if you hear my paper going, because I want to make sure I get to the important points that I have on my presentation. So whether you're a parent, a caregiver, or a coach, trying to strengthen that relationship is really going to be a way for you to let the young person or the athlete in your life know that you're there to stick it out, you're open-minded, and you're willing to try new things. So I think that this expression gets used all the time, thinking outside the box, but I do think it's important to shed some of those old ideas maybe, and to look at either the individual or even the team that you're with, and start to think about different ways that we can start to build some of these relationships. And I would say the first part of that is, doing something like this, like recognizing that there's thought and purpose that can go into how we build these relationships, right? Because I think a lot of times we get involved with people and things in our lives, and we don't put a lot of thought into how those relationships are being built. But for young people, the adults that they're interacting with is really important. Like, that's a really important relationship, and it's one with a power imbalance. So I think that some thought and some effort and, doing things like this and considering what is the impact of this relationship and how can I make it better is really important. And I think that sometimes it can feel like you're trying to understand, and sometimes it is, that you're trying to understand somebody from a very different background, from a very different lifestyle, or with very different needs than you might have personally, right? So you have to, those are really key parts to keeping in your mind when you're creating a space with someone that you're going to build a relationship. So I think communication and trust are going to be a big part of that, obviously, as they are with any relationship, but in particular when there's a power imbalance, because we have to recognize that, you as coaches are in a position of authority, right? So recognizing that comes with some power, and that comes with ways to influence people, right? So we just want to do that with knowledge and with trust and respect. And sometimes it's not, I think what happens often with young people, it's not that the adults in their lives aren't doing it with trust and respect, but it's that the young person isn't perceiving it. So they're not seeing it. So what can we do to make those things more seen and more obvious in a relationship? And the other thing, just in general, I think for young people, is we really have to check our judgment and our assumptions at the door, because there's going to be all kinds of people that come into our lives. And I think if we can go into it with an open mind and go into doing things in a way that might make sense for both of you and being able to negotiate that, I think it goes a long, long way into building a stronger connection. So this slide I always like, because I think it really, it sets up really the balance of what building a relationship looks like. But it also, for me, always points out to sort of how impossible it is in a way, because people that we're coaching, for sure, like young people and anyone in a coaching relationship knows that you have to be in a position of support and guidance, but then also structure and discipline. And those things can feel very at odds with each other at times, right? So that balance is really hard to keep and find. But I think the push and pull is actually important. I think if we're looking at it and thinking it's going to be easy or perfect or clear cut, then we're going to be in trouble. What I would say is come to appreciate the push and the pull, because I think what you're doing there is building your relationship. And part of the push and pull is figuring out what works for both of you, and what common ground you can find together, so that you can both grow in that relationship. And I would say that what those two things, those two balance pieces hinge on, is keeping an open mind, a sense of equality, and a supportive attitude. And that goes both ways. I mean, I will acknowledge that often, the person who is in the coaching position, or the adult in this situation, or the older person maybe, is the one who may have to bring more maturity skills sometimes, because I think, especially with young people or with children, they're at a different developmental place, right? So we're going to have to expect a little bit of different behavior from them, but we can always ask for respect. and support for sure. So as we move into the relationship itself, and I'll get into some steps of building that relationship soon, but these are the things, and they probably don't come as a surprise to anyone. I mean, I think these are the things that build healthy relationships in general, right? They're really the pillars of what I would consider a healthy relationship. And I think for anyone in general, it's a good practice, but I think particularly for coaches and athletes, good practice is going to be having a conversation about this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like the best, maybe the best idea would be to have an individual conversation, but I recognize that if you have a big team or there's a lot of people, that might not be possible to spend a lot of time with each individual having, drawn out conversations about relationships. But you can certainly have it as a team as well, right? And set expectations and set boundaries and talk about your coaching style and what works for them and what works for you. So those are always conversations that I think are important to have. But maybe the gold standard would be, when you're working certainly more intensely with one person in particular, I think having these conversations about what is in a healthy relationship, what one can expect from a healthy relationship, is a good idea, especially working with younger people, because they're still learning, right? This is still new information about how they are in the world and what's expected from them. So being purposeful and talking about, what a healthy relationship feels like. So in a healthy relationship, people should feel safe. They should feel respected. They should feel accepted. Those are things that you can expect from this relationship, right? This is something that whatever arguments we have or conflicts we have, you can expect to be accepted and safe and respected. So having, and even getting more detailed than that, like what that looks like or might feel like. And the same goes for unhealthy relationships. Like when someone in an unhealthy relationship might feel anxious, unsafe, unsure, confused. So those are some of the things that people might start to feel when they're not sure about what's going on, and maybe they need to talk about what's happening in the relationship. And almost being clear about the negative stuff is even more important, because I think that's harder for people to address. Like if you have a pretty good relationship, and for some people it comes very naturally, and you'll notice probably with some of the people that you coach, like a relationship comes very naturally. And then for other people, it's a bit more problematic or takes a bit more work. And so I think focusing on especially the situations where there is maybe more conflict or needs more work, they're harder conversations to have, but they're very important. I would say they're even more important, because especially with young people, sometimes when they have that inability to talk about those negative things, they'll go underground and then they don't get talked about. So I think being as open about it as you can. And I'm not suggesting that you have all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers. But the nice thing about opening this space with somebody is that you get to negotiate the answers together, right? It's not coming from you. You get to talk about it together. So, whether that's your relational style or how you give feedback or how you give constructive criticism or how you encourage or so all of those things could be talked about, right? So people know what to expect. So there's fewer surprises. But then, when the beauty thing about building that space is even when there are surprises, then you can also talk about those. Like if someone is shocked by a way you've behaved, they can say like, oh, I didn't like it when you did that. And then you can say, oh, here's why I did it. And they get to have their say. And so it builds that collaborative working together on this relationship. It creates a safe space, which I know is also a bit of a cliche, but I think it is a good goal to have, like to set up with somebody. So talking about just being purposeful and talking about these things as you start a relationship with someone, I think can be really important. And I always just sort of add in this slide here about modeling healthy relationships, because I think the other thing that happens a lot is that it's that like say what I or do what I say, not what I do, that kind of thing, because sometimes what happens with young people is they expect you to be one way with them, but then when they see you elsewhere, you're acting a very different way, right? So we want to be consistent in how we're approaching people in our relational style, so that the young people in our lives get to see that this is how we treat people and this is how we act. Allowing people to be themselves and showing young people that there is unconditional acceptance. It really allows them to identify in themselves how they want to be treated in the world. It really starts that process of like being like, okay, someone's treating me this way, and this is a person I respect as my coach. They're very important to me. How they think about me is really important. So what happens is it starts to build then their ability to look out into the rest of the world and expect treatment. So I think I think it's really a very important relationship. And I'll tell you, like, I was a counselor for 15 years on the phones at Kids Help Phone, and kids would talk about their coaches all the time. Like, they're very important people in their lives. Like, these are really, your opinions matter, your thoughts matter, how you feel about the kids the young people that you work with matters to them. And so, it's for sure a very important relationship in their lives, which I'm sure is not a shock to you, but I think sometimes people underestimate the importance that they have in people's lives. And the other thing that recently came to my attention was a study that was done, and they were talking about in it how one individual role model can make a difference in a young person's life. So lots of kids who they've found are resilient to all kinds of struggles in their lives, with one role model in their life can make a huge difference to their future successes. So these are important roles that we're playing in young people's lives for sure. Okay. And so again, I think the important thing is to take some time to reflect back on your own relational style. So how is it that you are with people? How do you coach people? What's your style is it different with different people? Are you a certain way with certain kinds of young people? Taking a moment to reflect on that for yourself and being able to look back on it really will give you an idea about how you can then talk about it with the people in your life. Because, I think, again, we do these things by going out into the world and just doing, right? We don't necessarily consider it. So even just thinking to yourself, like, how is it that people probably see me when I'm doing X, Y, and Z? It gives you a way to also be able to have that conversation with someone that you're maybe about to start coaching about expectations and about boundaries and what kinds of things they can expect from you. Because I think, so much is possible within that conversation. And if you set the stage properly and everyone sort of knows what to expect and knows the boundaries of the relationship, I think we're all set up much better for it to be safe and healthy. And there's really not, I don't think that there's really a way for us to not be human, which is good. So we need to also always remember that ruptures will happen, right? Like these aren't going to be perfect relationships, as there are no relationships in the world. So we will, much like in counseling, and that's a word that we use in counseling all the time, is rupture. So in counseling, if you have a rupture with someone, you get this, obviously someone's probably going to tell you they're unhappy with what you're talking about or doing. And so really it becomes just another opportunity to build a relationship. How you deal with that rupture is what's important, because they will happen. And sometimes you will cause them and sometimes they will cause them, but just to recognize that we're all human and that for sure we will have conflicts. I think what's really important is how we deal with that conflict and how we build afterward. And I wouldn't say that I came to cherish ruptures in counseling necessarily, but I did come to see them as an opportunity to further deepen our connection for sure. So they can be good things when they happen. They might be loud and frustrating and all kinds of other feelings, but they can definitely end up in a good place. So try not to get too worried about conflicts and ruptures when they happen. So the common space between young people and coaches in their lives is one where, and this is again that impossible task, where young people need enough space to grow, but they also need enough structure to feel safe in, right? So we're trying to create a space where both of those things are happening. And it is possible. I think it just takes some focus and concentration. So I'm going to go through some very seemingly obvious aspects of what I consider a healthy relationship, what things are kind of you would find in a healthy coaching relationship. And then as I go through them, maybe I'll go through them. I'm just looking at the time and I want to make sure that there's time for questions. I'll go through them. And then if there are things that you feel like that's not going to work at all, that's not going to happen in a coaching relationship, please let me know, because I think my bias for sure is working with young people in a counseling perspective, which is obviously very different than a coaching perspective. But I think that the two worlds really come together in a unique way to support people, which is, I think, what we all want to do, right? And be successful and achieve greatness if we can. So the first thing seems really obvious, which is listen. However, it's not so obvious if you've ever been around or had or have young people, teenagers in your lives. Information comes in lots of different ways, and it's not often answers to direct questions. Usually asking questions will probably get you something like, I don't know, I don't want to talk about it. Like, that's generally the sort of answers that we get from the young people in our lives. So I think really for me, what's important is to be around and be curious and sort of be engaged and be people in their lives that they feel that they can trust and come to when they do want to talk about things. So listening can look like lots of things, is what I'll say. It could just be being around and also seeing young people with their teammates and with other people. That will give you a lot of information about how they're doing and things that you might want to follow up on with them. This is number 2 here, validate their feelings, is very, very counselor-y. That very much is going to be from a counseling perspective. But I'll tell you, it's a really good trick to know how to do, because, and this is, I'll tell you, with everyone in your life, this doesn't even just have to be with your athletes. This could be with anybody. If somebody is coming to you and they're saying like, oh, I can't deal with this, and this is happening and that's happening, and your first response might be, because it is for many people, to try to fix it immediately. So to say like, oh, you should do this or do that, or to make them feel better by saying like, oh, well, at least this isn't happening, or at least you still have that. And the problem is with both of those responses, they're not bad. They just can feel a bit dismissive, right? If somebody's sharing a feeling with you, or they're frustrated, or even if they're not even speaking it, let's say they're like, destroying, like they're just like wrecking something in front of you, or really acting out or being physical, instead of trying to fix it or even, get in there and make them feel better, literally just being like, you seem really frustrated. Like, that's enough. Like, wow, it seems like you are very upset. And just leave it. Like, let that sit and just let them respond to that, and just keep reflecting back the feeling. And it really can create a space of just understanding. You will get to the problem solving, you will get to the feeling better. But if you can stay in that moment of just like sitting with the feeling for a minute, it will go a long way, and it usually diffuses it much quicker. Like, the problem with if you dismiss the feeling at the beginning, one of the problems that can happen is that the feeling actually grows up a bit, like it gets a bit stronger. So if you can just sit with it and say like, yeah, that's frustrating, or whatever the feeling is, it will go a long way. It helps people. I mean, I think if really what it's doing is helping just people feel understood, not judged in the moment, and just respected and held. Like, it just feels much better to hear that. And you've probably experienced it in your own life too. Transparency, I can't say enough about. I think that especially in any relationship where there's a power imbalance. So, as a coach, you're the holder of the rules and of the of all of the ways that this sport or this game is going to work, right? You're the person who's holding that, and really they're looking to you for that kind of authority. I'm sure that I'm sure that you've all experienced this. People don't like it, right? Like it's also not a nice feeling sometimes when you get to experience it. So what I would say about setting rules and being authoritarian is to just, that's fine. It's definitely your role, and you need to do it. And I mean, it's the same with parents. Like people need to set rules, and it has to be this way. I would say just be ready to explain why. Like just be ready to back it up a little bit with why the rules are that way, and how they can, and why they might be good for it to work that way. And again, you're not probably, it's the goal isn't to get someone to agree with you or to feel good about what you're saying or doing necessarily. It's to help them understand where it's coming from, and that's it. Like people will still, be upset or angry, and that we might not be able to change that. But what we can do is just be able to, say a little bit about why it's that way. And I think it just feels respectful. I think it's just a way of showing respect. And I would also say that it doesn't have to be that in every situation you're explaining the why. Like it might be that with the team at the beginning of the year, you say like, we set these ground rules and this is the here are the reasons why. Like you're transparent at the beginning about why it is that way. And then you don't have to, and then you might need to check in around it again a few months later, but you can set the rules and set it up so that if you have these conversations, they're not things you need to talk about every day. Like there's a way to set this up, I think, where you do some work at the beginning and then the relationship gets to grow and grow on a good foundation. And so you don't need to come back to these things all the time so that you're not constantly explaining every step or every decision you make, but you set it up so that the transparency is, here are the rules and here are why they are the way they are. And you're welcome to ask questions about that whenever you need to. But we'll just move forward understanding that we all trust and accept and acknowledge these rules. And then I think, for the most part, I think like people accept that. Like I think even if they don't like it, if they understand why things are the way they are, then they'll accept that. Show trust. I think it can be really challenging sometimes to always sort of be able to see who it is that needs to be shown that trust. But I would say if there are ways that you can find opportunities to give people, an opportunity to rise to the occasion, an opportunity to show that you have faith that they can do it, that they'll try really hard, asking for like a favor or asking someone to help you with like setting up or tearing down or doing the stretching, like whatever it is that is the opportunity that you can offer to somebody, it really grows self-confidence to feel like your coach feels confident that you can do it, that they think you can do the job. It really is a huge ego boost. And it can be tricky, right? Because I think it's, it doesn't always work. Like sometimes people don't rise to the occasion or they, so that will happen for sure. So it's about, and again, that's processing those things. So then like, why didn't it work out that time? And how come it didn't happen? But we do need to continually be giving people, I think, opportunities to grow and to build that trust. I think it's part of the job we take on is, helping people grow and learn about being in the world. So giving real compliments and looking for strengths, again, very much from my counseling background, we do most of the work that we do from a strengths-based perspective. So we're constantly looking for those tiny little, nuggets of like, working really hard, or you've tried really hard, or maybe there's a specific skill that showed up that day that you can compliment, but they need to be sort of concrete and real. I think if young people, especially, I know in counseling, if they feel like you're sort of like just calling things out or just trying to like blow smoke a little bit and say like, oh, you're really amazing and this is great. And if you're doing that and if it doesn't resonate with them, it can feel false. It can feel like it's not genuine. So rather than, I guess, cheerleading, rather than cheerlead that way, I think you can still cheerlead, but just finding real compliments to couch it in. So like, I saw that you even though you missed that, I saw you really try at that, and I saw it was different than yesterday. And I want to say, like, you're really giving it a good shot, and you're really trying hard to get at that. So you're complimenting their, like, commitment and their willingness to try, even though they keep failing. And so you want to find the strength in it, so that they feel like there's something they can feel proud of, even if it's not the perfect result at the end. So yeah, and I think the other thing is like the praise and it always seems to me that the coaches or the adults or the people that are the ones doing the encouraging, I think we often feel like we're overdoing it. And then the information I get back from young people is that they feel like they're not getting enough of that. So, meeting in the middle, I would say. And I think it depends again on the style of your style, because I don't want people to be acting in a way that's not genuine to them, because that also feels icky. People, no one likes it if they can tell someone's acting in a way that's not quite them. So I think it's about finding your own style for sure. Like, as a counselor, I definitely was someone who was very, I'm still a counselor, but when I counseled the kids' health phone, for sure, I was definitely someone who wasn't so, like, I don't know how to describe it, like super ooey gooey with the feelings. Like, I wasn't, which is funny to hear as a counselor, but I was very structural and very like, how do we work on this? And it was just my style. If someone else tried to do that, it would probably sound harsh or sound kind of like, I don't know, just not right. Whereas if I tried to sound like some of the counselors that I worked with, who were so just like the kindest, most empathetic, just the sweetest counselors, if I tried to do that, it would have just sounded terrible because it wasn't my personality, right? And I think the same is true for coaching and just for being in the world. Just think about what style you do have and in what ways you can adjust that to meet what you feel and what the young people in your lives are saying that their needs are. And what might work for them. And then I think we're getting close to the last slide. And this is always the hardest slide. Take it easy. It's tough. Don't hit the roof. Okay, so first I'm going to start by saying this is the hardest thing to do, and that we're all human. And what I said before about ruptures still stands true. So you will have emotional reactions. There's a lot of investment in everything that you're doing with people. There's a lot of personal investment, group investment, financial investment. Like, there's tons of layers of pressure on this, right? This is a relationship that exists with a lot of pressure around it. And so you will have emotional reactions. I mean, that's just part of life, right? And that's definitely part of sport. So that's fine. It's what you do with it that's important, right? And we want it to be done in a way that people aren't experiencing it as threatening or unsafe or all of those things. So I think what we can do, again, we can look in ourselves to figure out, like, okay, when I'm pressed and when I feel pressure, how do I respond? What are my reactions? And some of those discussions you can have before with your team or with your athletes, right? By saying, like, okay, like, we all know, or I know that when we get into this situation, this is when I'm heightened, right? This is when I'm pumped up. And here's the reason why. It's because I'm excited, I'm feeling, pressure to do well and to win. And so, but explaining some of those reasons takes the mystery out of it, so that when someone's looking at you and you look very upset, they don't think like, oh my God, like they're so mad at me, or they hate me, or they're angry at me. Because people, especially young people, will personalize it, right? They will take it personally. So if they have some ideas about why, a coach or an adult in their life might react that way, it takes the mystery out of it, and they're much less likely to take it personally. So I think, just being human first, and also knowing that if you can, like, if there is a moment where you can step away and come back to a conversation, like, I think when we're angry, when we're upset, when we're excited, when our emotions are heightened, those aren't necessarily the best times for super important conversations. because, there's a lot of emotions running, and it just might be that it's not the right time. So if possible, and there's a way to take a beat and to move away and come back to this conversation later, do it. And we all have our own ways that we sort of center and ground ourselves, but coming back to a conversation once we've grounded ourselves, it can be much more helpful. Again, especially with kids or young people. I mean, I say this, and I also think there's lots of adults in my life who I'd say this is true for too. People will take it personally. They will personalize how you appear emotionally. They will think it's their fault. They will think it's something that they did, right? So if it's easy enough to say, I'm obviously upset. I'm going to go away and calm down and relax, and then we'll come back and talk about this later. Like, I think if we can do that, it'll just separate out some of the conversations from the really intense feelings. And it's just, I think the conversation will go much better. And then, I mean, I would imagine that a lot of people get into sports and athleticism because they like to have fun. So I think that there's also, we want to also make sure that those things are happening, right? And that young people feel like they're being seen in a holistic way, so that, how I would put this easily is that people want to feel like they're liked for all kinds of reasons, not just because they're really good at something or really bad at something or whatever, but they want to feel like that their coaches see them as whole people and as people who are good at other things and also like to have fun. But when you're doing that, it works for you in the opposite way too, where the people that you are coaching also get to see you in a different light and a different perspective and see you as a whole person too, right? And so I think it rounds out the relationship a little bit if you're able to find those times where you're spending time together that's not so intense or focused. Yeah, and I think the last thing really, I think, is when the other thing that I always hear from like adults that I work with when they're trying to, work on these relationships is that they don't think it's working. Like they don't think, it doesn't appear like it's working. And I wouldn't look to the young people in our lives to necessarily see that, because you won't get a lot of that feedback right away. I think it'll be subtle. And the best way you'll know that it'll be working really will be that people will just will be able to talk with you. Like they'll sit there and listen. They don't have to agree. They don't have to like it, but they will participate. And I think if people are participating, then anything is possible. And I will say that, like, for having been on the phones for 20 years, a Kids Help Phone, honestly, what I hear over and over from young people is what they want from the adults in their lives, whether it's parents, coaches, caregivers. What they want is they want to feel that there's genuine acceptance, that like they're accepted genuinely and that they are liked, and that they will keep their word, that they will say that they're going to do something and they will support them, and then they will follow through on that. There will be follow through. So the adults in their lives, they want them to be open to them and they want them to be trustworthy. So follow through is important. And I think I'll leave it there so that we have a little bit of time for questions if there are some. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayle. So lots of comments on the chat about if you're a parent, you've seen a lot of the things that you've mentioned here. But I also like the point that you mentioned that there's no age for this, because I do see it in some adults sometimes that needing to validate the feelings, and sometimes you're in a situation where you don't even notice your feelings, right? And just it comes up very quickly. And so those very much good advice for sure. I do welcome the I don't have any quite chats yet, but if anybody wants to or is interested, you can either raise your hand and then unmute, or if you want to put it in the chats. One question we get common in this field is, if I'm a high performance sport and I'm trying to push my athletes, would it be a teenager? Would it be a young adult? What is that fine line? How do I know that I'm pushing and then I'm motivating, but I'm not and over that line where it's considered abuse or it's considered a little bit unhealthy? So how do I make sure that I'm there? Do you have any tips on this?
For sure, yeah. I mean, like anything in relationships, it won't be super generalized, because it really will come down to the person that you're working with, because I think that fine line is going to be different for everybody, right? So it hinges on your relationship with them. So what I would say is that would be, especially for some of the higher performing, I would imagine it's like a more intense relationships at times. So maybe I would say early on in the relationship, when you're starting to coach someone, or even if it's time for you to just like level set again, have the discussion, like just talk about it, be transparent. What is it like? What if I was just going to be a perfect coach, not possible. If I was going to be a perfect coach for you, what would that look like? Just start. And so just getting them talking about like, and it could be, crazy, fantastical things, but it gets them talking about what they need from you as a coach. And then, so you talk about those things, and then you would say, okay, it sounds like, transparency or trust, or these things are important to you. Now, what would be too much? What don't you want to see? What's not going to work for you? What's going to make you feel, unmotivated or less likely to want to participate? So be specific, and then get from them what doesn't work from them. And then I think the really important thing is to say, and how would I know? So how would I know that I'm starting to do those things, right? Because I mean, that's the other thing, is that recognizing that these things are happening very quickly in relationships, or during games, or during, events where you're not, where you need to have the conversation before, not in the moment, right? So what you want to hear from your athlete is like, how would I know if it's starting to be uncomfortable for you? Because that, I think if you've laid that groundwork, then they can at least say to you, okay, yesterday during the game when you did blah, 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 I didn't really like that. Okay, let's talk about that. So you can then do that conversation, right? There's a space created where they can tell you, like, that was a little over the line for me. I didn't love that.
Perfect. So a lot has to go back to the communication. So the communication prior, the communication during, and then after as well. So having that open line. So very good. Thank you. We do have one question here. So from Carol, often parents can jump into the middle of the building of a relationship. That can make things tricky and difficult, especially when they are not there. Any advice on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, I think even as a counselor, that's something that we often, parents would call us up and be like, what did my kid talk about yesterday? And of course, I can't tell you that. So, I think, again, maybe lay like just a little groundwork with the parents previously. Like you could say to them, like, I'm so glad that you're here and you're interested and you want to be part of this. And here's what your role is going to be really important. Like your role is going to be really important to be like supporting and making sure they're on time and like doing all that good stuff. And then we're going to need this space, like just where, we're going to work on these things in our relationship. So, and I'm not suggesting it's good or bad, but like a lot of places will use like almost like little contracts. Where you get to say like where the parent, and so a young person could share that with their parents. Like they'll just say like, in our coaching relationship, we expect X, Y, and Z, and then you expect from the kid X, Y, and Z. And so it's just very laid out, and it maybe just reassures parents. I don't know if it will always stop parents jumping in. That's probably never going to happen because they're going to want to get involved. But I think that if there's something that the young person can say to their parents, this is what we're doing, like this is the expectation of our relationship, then maybe there's a polite way to say, like, maybe just butt out. Because it's hard. I mean, I think, if parents are asking questions, and maybe you can even build it informally where like, I don't know, it's like, like parent teacher night. Maybe you could have like a time, like a specific time that you meet with parents just to like have a check-in and chat, so that the rest of the time they kind of leave you alone.
Good ideas. Yeah, good ideas. So again, goes back to communication. So, and defining some of the roles. You mentioned if you define the roles of each and how each participate to build this young person up, and I say young, but it could be an adult as well. But whoever's supporting that athlete is having defined roles for each, having clear what the expectations, still having that line of communication, being able to have that voice and say. And I like your feedback in terms of some of those agreements, right? Because I know where I stand and I know where I can come in. I'm not the coach, and I will respect space, but I'm also able to voice and have the communication part in, and I like the agreements as well. So perfect. Yeah, and that was the same comment for Carol. So she liked that the expectation in the specific time to include parents. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beginning, maybe midway, and also maybe at the end. So yeah, of the
Yeah.
season, or great. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think really the biggest thing, I think the biggest place where we end up in conflict in relationships is often when like expectations are miscommunicated. So, I thought this, but you thought this. So we're both doing what we thought was expected, but it was miscommunicated, right? So anytime that we can just be purposeful about laying that out of what's expected, and it sounds like a belabored process, but it's really not. Like, it could be as easy as saying, like, I expect that you're gonna show up on time and that you're gonna do, like, it could be just basic things, but though following those things is a way of communicating respect for both sides. And it just means there's less area for miscommunication.
Sounds good. Dan, thank you very much. So he put in a comment which I will read, but he also put in a link. They're very good. So there's a 100-point exercise he mentioned. So to help them and the children understand each other's youth and sports goals, use the form to allocate a total of. Sorry, my screen's going different. Total
Yeah.
of 100-point exercise. Help them understand each other and use sports goals. Use the form to allocate a total of 100 points, indicating the emphasis your place on the various goals listed. Parents and children should fill out their form individually and use for them. Oh, pretty neat. I'll definitely look into that. I didn't know about this, but I definitely will. And same with the other coaches here for sure. So again, that's another tool of being able to evaluate and we're doing as well for sure. Thank you very much for that, for sharing. Any other questions to share with Gayle? She welcomes comments. She definitely would like to hear from you. You can, again, like I said, raise your hand, unmute.
Recognizing, I think for me, I always, like, a part of this with relationships in general is listening to your instincts. So if you're starting to feel like something's not quite right, or it's off, or you're wondering about something, I think it's okay. And I certainly, as a counselor, we are very attuned to doing it, is to checking in. Like, there's just a way to ask questions, just be tentative and ask a question like, I'm sensing that this or that's happening. I just wanted to check in. Because I think what happens then is, like, if a person that you're working with isn't happy with how it's going, or they're not pleased, like they don't like something, as human beings, we're not so tempted to share that. Like, we definitely sort of, we're just like, I'm just gonna hope it goes away. Like, I'm just not gonna say anything. And so being the counselor or the coach or the person who's in that position, if we extend that olive branch and we say, like, I just noticed that this is happening, or maybe, like, you're not, like, I noticed you're not participating as much, or I noticed that you're sort of staying at the back, or you want to go last, or whatever, right? Whatever it is. And then you could just, and you can say, like, I might be off base, or maybe you're just having a bad day or week, and that's totally fine. But is there anything else going on? Like, if there's anything going on that, we can work on together. It may not take you up on it the first time, but, like, if you come back around to it, like, and check in again at some point, like, that goes a long way with people. Like, because I think, people don't want to be problem makers. They don't want to be troublemakers. So they just sort of get quiet. So I have found that checking in definitely leads to more of those discussions. That are, that sometimes you can open a can of worms for sure, but I would suggest that can of worms, while closed, was causing more trouble than once you open it. So where possible, I would get in there and do what you can.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for adding that. The other, maybe the next point I'd like you maybe to touch on, if possible, is the difference of doing this between a team sport and individual sport. Like, I do hear that there's a difference and I know I just from practicing different sports that it's different how you handle or how you coach a team that is a bigger sport, like, so would be a hockey team, volley team, compared to the more individual sports. So that communication, like, how does it differ when you're doing it to a group versus individual?
You know, I think for a group, you're looking at more what you're paying attention to is a bit more group dynamics. For the most part, like obviously, if you've worked with a group of young people at all, or people you know, sometimes you can tell that there's people like individuals struggling in a more profound way, and they're sort of outliers. I would say in general, as a team, you're looking for more like group dynamics to sort of read what's going on and how it's working. So your conversation might be more about not just about like your relationship one-to-one with the person, but your relationship to the group and their relationship to you, but also to each other, right? So there's a group dynamic level to the conversation, and there's lots of great resources out there about like just group dynamics and how to like manage some of that and work. It's a little bit different for sure because it's like an extra layer, right? To that, because I'm sure you've all, if you've coached big teams, you've all experienced when like there's just something off with everybody, like there's something not quite right about the whole group, right? And you can't put your finger on it. So I would say they can be maybe a little less intense, the relationship, because I mean, I think that some of the one-on-one coaching relationships are quite intimate, really, right? Like they're quite close. And so there's lots of room there discussion of that relationship. So with one person, you might have more space and time to be able to talk about it, to be able to like shape it in a way that really is supportive and encouraging and works really well with the person. In a group situation, I would say where it may be less one-on-one, and there might even be people on the team that you don't connect with very much at all, and that can happen too.
Perfect. Well, very much. Thank you. So I guess we will be leaving it to here. Thank you very much, Gayle, for taking the time and sharing some your great tools for communication, reminding us that we're human and human first. And so whether we're coaches, whether we're athletes, it's recognizing the humanness in us and just being true with our words, right? And just looking at how we can build each other up and help in supporting them for sure. So thank you for joining us. I think again in this webinar. I appreciate it. And we've put in the feedback there. So we definitely want to hear from you, different topics, different things that you'd like. And again, thank you for the wiseness of Gayle. Contact information is here, and for the website, there's lots of great resources on the website. I invite you to go to the Kids Help Phone website, and again, French and English, lots of there for you. So super. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Love you.
Take good care.
C'est beau.